Welcome into the Emo Online Video Fast Break as the Wildcats fall on Allen Fieldhouse 90-78 this evening. K-State battled a little bit in the first half, but ultimately they put themselves in a hole early. They fought back from that one after a Jerome Tang technical. They went on a little bit of a run and trimmed the lead down to 3. Then their turnovers became more of a problem, and it did them in. KU pushed the lead to 12 by halftime, and it got a little bit closer at times, but then it inched back out, and eventually the teams played dead even in the second half, 41-41. So K-State doesn't come away with the win. Alec, what are the initial takeaways from K-State's loss in Allen?
Yeah, I think Gabe said it really well. At one point in the second half, he sends us a text, and he says something along the lines of K-State just got Allen Fieldhoused. Not to make Allen Fieldhouse a verb, but he did in this context. And I think what he was really speaking to was the ability of Kansas to go on a quick run at that point in the second half with about 5 to 6 minutes left or whatever in the final 5 minutes of the first half. And I feel like that's where K-State really maybe lost the game, I guess you could kind of say. Jerome Tang said afterwards, you can't win a game on the road in an environment like this in the first half, but you can sure as heck lose one. And I thought when Zach Clemens drilled a 3 in the first half, I thought that put them in a really tough spot. And then even dating back even a little bit further into the game, I mean, DeJuan Harris comes out and drills an open shot on the very first possession, and that's kind of reminiscent of what happened for Kansas in their win at Kentucky on Saturday. And then Harris goes for 18 points, which ties a career high, which he set earlier this year in their win over Texas Tech. So I know that Jalen Wilson didn't go for 38 for KU like he did earlier in the season, but I actually think that K-State was in a much worse situation because of the success that Harris had going for 18. McCullough goes for 15 or whatever, 15 or 16 or whatever it is as well. So when KU's clicking like that on offense, it's a team that I think can win a national title. The KU team that showed up in Bramlage earlier this season, I don't think that team's good enough to win a national title. But the one that showed up tonight, I think, is good enough.
Well, you talk about all the different guys that stepped up in the game and how maybe that didn't work in K-State's favor. I mean, Bill Self talked about it afterwards when people mentioned that Jalen Wilson in this 5-game stretch has just been on an absolute tear. I think 133 points in 5 games is what Jalen Wilson has been able to put up. And Bill Self noted, he's like, yeah, but we're 2-3 in that stretch. And so we saw what happened tonight here was they were able to get the win, and it's because all 9 guys that played for him scored the basketball, including 8 guys that had at least 5 points in the game. And even though it doesn't total to a lot,
great game for DeJuan Harris.
Yeah, and that's when you knew when DeJuan Harris hit a 3 to start the game and then he's on, like, you're not going to beat Kansas when you let DeJuan Harris score 18 points. And so as much as that's DeJuan Harris playing a good game, that's also on K-State for not defending well. They had trouble all night long, especially with guys cutting into the lane. It led to easy buckets of the rim, and when it didn't lead to easy buckets of the rim, it led to kickouts to where Kansas had the shot to knock down threes. And that was another thing that stood out in this game was Kansas made the 3 early. They ended up shooting, I think, close to 50% from 3 in the first half. And from that point, even when they cooled off in the second, it didn't matter as much. So that was a significant deal, the way it played out. And Kansas just did things better this game than what they did the first one. And what I was going to say about the bench, it's only 19-9 that KU outscores K-State in bench points, but the difference was 31-8 in favor of K-State in Manhattan. And so the fact that KU got anything from their bench, that's what made them different tonight. And that's, to your point, when they play like this, that's what makes them a national title team. And you think about how they, a totally different team last year, a better team last year. But the team that came back and beat Carolina in the championship game, they got production from guys other than Ochai Agbaji and Jalen Wilson. They got it from, Remy Martin stepping up. And that's why they won, really, because Remy Martin played his best basketball in March for Kansas last year. So same situation going on here now where they've been able to step up. A couple of other things from the game tonight that stand out to me. Marquise Noel and Keontae Johnson, they end up with a good night from a scoring perspective. They combined for 45. 23 and 22 is what they end up with. The problem is the efficiency wasn't there. They are 32% from the field in the game, and that's just not going to get it done for the Wildcats, including the fact that Marquise Noel again had over 5 turnovers, I think right at that number, but that's now 3 or 4 games in conference play that Noel has had 5 or more turnovers, and that's not a good recipe for the Wildcats.
Yeah, and I kind of want to go back to what you were talking about a little bit earlier with DeJuan Harris, and I wrote in the preview of this story and the what to watch for and the 3 keys kind of thing for K-State was that Noel needed to win the guard matchup between himself and DeJuan Harris, and he won it in the game at Bramlage, and he didn't even come close to winning it tonight. And Mason, I know that they've won games this season with him not winning the matchup in the backcourt with his direct competitor at point guard, but I think that they need him to be the best point guard on the court most nights for them to win, especially against a quality team like Kansas. You can probably get away with beating a team like Florida with him not being your best player, and he was their best player against Florida, but you can get away with beating a team like Texas Tech potentially, especially if you're at home, if he's not your best player. But they need him to be consistent, and they need him to stop turning the ball over so much. And I understand they put the ball in his hands a ton, and his usage rate is really, really high. So he's going to turn the ball over, and he's going to have a ton of assists. But you can't turn it over at the rate that he's turning it over right now because they have other guys that already turn it over a lot. Keontae Johnson turns it over a lot. Tonight, he had just 2, but that's one of the lower games he's had as far as
early in the game, K-State had 10 turnovers in the first half. 8 of them come from the 5 from Noel and then the 3 from Daquan Tomlin, and Tomlin gets a ton of touches. And with what Tomlin can do, you want him to be able to take the ball, but sometimes he just has a lack of control in there. So that's obviously a big problem for K-State that they're going to have to correct. One other thing, after the game, Jerome Tang kind of put the onus on himself for saying he needs to figure out K-State's rotations better. Said that the bench played well for them the first time they beat Kansas. Tonight, not so much, but he said that's on him. He's got to find a way to work it out. Part of that's because David Gasson has returned, so now he has to figure out how do I get guys certain minutes with adding another guy like Gasson to the mix. And Bill Self said afterwards that even though K-State didn't win this matchup, they are a better team with David Gasson on the floor, and I think we've seen that. So that's something to watch moving forward is how are the Wildcats going to be able to get Gasson in the mix, but also make sure that they have the different players that still need to have some of their shine and some of the marquee nights. Because like Ish Massoud made some shots in the first half, but we really didn't see much of him tonight.
Yeah, I think it's just going to come down to figuring out what exactly they can do to get David Gasson kind of worked in. He missed nearly a month, but they worked with him earlier in the season, but obviously against much lower level opponents. And I do think he gives them another wrinkle. I mean, Coach Self talked about after the game, he gives them another dimension. And that's true because he can step out and shoot it a little bit. I think he's a much better defender than Bebe Igiola is as well. So I think that his involvement is really important, especially for this team, as they kind of look forward to what the future holds for them because the Big 12 doesn't get a lot easier for them. I mean, they got Texas coming to town on Saturday, and if K-State wants to win a Big 12 title, and we can talk about this more on the podcast, I almost feel like that's a must-win game because at this point you're now sitting in second place in the league, tied with Iowa State, tied with Kansas. I think it's a 3-way tie at this point, and Texas is in first place in the league all by themselves. But you can kind of bring it back to another team in your same spot if you beat Texas on Saturday. So there's a lot working for K-State, and I'm excited to see what kind of improvements and adjustments they make because they struggled a lot defensively against Texas, and I think a lot of it was covered up by the fact that they had an all-time offensive performance.
Yep, it's going to be exciting to see how they bounce back against Texas because, I mean, just what you were saying, I mentioned it in the fast break, but for K-State, that game is important because that's what determines if this season is still about trying to win a Big 12 title or if it just turns into after that, all right, we're playing for our seeding. We're trying to be, a 4 or 5 seed still, as opposed to right now, the position they're in, they could win the conference and they could, end up being a 3 or higher in the NCAA tournament. So it's going to be important. We'll see what it ends up coming about. One thing to keep in mind, and this is a good thing to keep everybody sane. Most of you already know this because you've watched enough of these games play out in Allen Fieldhouse. But the last 2 Big 12 title teams for K-State, when they came to Allen Fieldhouse that season, they lost by 21 and 15 points. So even those teams have not played close games in Allen. This team tonight, it feels like they were much closer, even though Kansas had them at a good distance most of the game. K-State did a lot of that to themselves. So this is still a good basketball team. It's a frustrating night and not what K-State would have liked. But now they get a great chance to bounce back in a game you got to have if you want to still be a conference title contender when Texas comes to town this weekend. Alec and I will have more Wednesday afternoon with the post-game podcast and our full thoughts, and then also be ready to preview Texas and probably some more thoughts on that Big 12 football schedule that came out as we have some time to think about it. More coverage coming your way on EMA Online throughout the rest of the week and the rest of the year following the Cats. For Alec, I'm Mason. That'll do it for us tonight from Allen Fieldhouse.